Good morning, students. Welcome to our first video session. Today we are going to start with metals and non-metals. Now, before we take up the study of metals and non-metals, let us first understand some of the important terms associated with the metals and non-metals. Firstly, what do you understand by the term luster? Is the state or quality of shining by reflecting light from the surface of a metal. Secondly, we come across the term malleability, is the ability to withstand hammering and can be beaten into thin sheets. Next is ductility, is the property by which metals can be drawn into thin wires. Next term is electrical conductivity, is the quantity of electricity transmitted by a unit area in a unit time under a unit potential difference. Then we come across the term tensile strength. It is also referred as tenacity, is the resistance of a metallic wire to pulling action. Then sonority is the characteristics of metals to emit a deep resonant sound when struck. Brittle, it stands for what? It can be easily broken or pulverized, means it can be easily powdered. And finally, the term is ore. Ores are minerals from which the metals are extracted profitably at a low cost. Now let us discuss the physical properties of metals with respect to luster. Metals in the pure state generally shine. The shine of the metallic surface is called the metallic luster. Next, we move on to malleability. Is the property of metals by which they can be beaten into thin sheets is known as malleability. For example, silver metal is beaten to make silver foil used for decorating sweets. Next is ductility. It is one of the properties of metals by virtue of which they can be drawn into thin wires. For example, copper and iron can be drawn into wires. Next important property is conductivity. Metals are good conductors of heat and electricity. Heat and electricity can pass through them easily. Now we discuss sonorous. Metals produce a ringing sound when struck hard, so they are called sonorous. And finally, metals are solids. All metals are solids except mercury, the only metal which is liquid at room temperature. We can cut sodium and potassium with the help of a knife because it is very soft. Metals like mercury, sodium, and potassium are exceptional metals. Examples of metals: iron, copper, gold, aluminium, silver, calcium, etc. Now, let us discuss the physical properties of non-metals. Firstly, solid nonmetals are soft and dull. They do not possess any shine. They break down into a powdery mass of tapping with a hammer. For example, coal and sulfur. So when you hammer them, it turns into powder. Okay, it breaks into pieces. So we say it is brittle also. Secondly, non-metals are non-sonorous. That means they are not going to produce sound when struck. Thirdly, they are poor conductors of heat and electricity. Of course, there are some non-metals. They are good conductors of electricity, for instance, graphite. Next is they do not possess metallic luster. It's true. Non-metals do not possess metallic luster. However, non-metals like graphite, iodine, they possess metallic luster. They are exceptions. They possess no malleability and ductility. That means non-metals are non-malleable and non-ductile. Examples of nonmetals: phosphorus, sulfur, carbon, oxygen, etc. Now let us discuss the main differences between metals and non-metals. Firstly, metals are lustrous, that is, they have a property to shine. Whereas non-metals, they are non-lustrous, that is, they do not have shining surface except graphite and iodine. So these two are exceptions. That is, graphite and iodine, they are they possess, shiny surfaces. Next is all metals exist as solids except mercury, which is liquid at room temperature. Non-metals, they are generally soft except diamond. Of course, you know very well diamond is one of the hardest substance known. Thirdly, metals can be drawn into wires. This is known as ductility. Whereas non-metals, they are non-ductile. That means it cannot be drawn into thin wire. Next, metals can be converted into thin sheets. This is known as malleability, except mercury. Whereas non-metals, they are non-malleable. That means it cannot be beaten into thin sheets. Next is metals are good conductors of heat and electricity, except lead and mercury. These are poor conductors of heat and electricity. Whereas nonmetals are poor conductors of heat and electricity, except graphite, which is a good conductor of electricity. And lastly, they have high density and high melting point. Exception: sodium and potassium have low melting points. Whereas nonmetals, they generally have low density compared to metals and low melting points, except diamond, which has high melting point. Now let us deal with properties of metalloids. Some elements have intermediate properties between those of metals and non-metals. So they are in between metals and non-metals. They are called metalloids. For example, silicon, germanium, arsenic, boron, etc. Next is noble gases. Noble gases have stable electronic configuration, meaning they have 8 electrons in its outermost shell, which we call octet structure, except helium, which has a duplet structure. As such, they do not react with any other substance. For example, helium, neon, argon, krypton, xenon, and radon. Thank you, students. I would request you, think like a proton and stay positive. Then you'll enjoy chemistry.